Mark, how are you, sir?
I'm all right today.
Sweet. Well, we used yesterday to do a totally different topic, so that was perfect. And so here we are back looking at the Beatitudes, and it's been a fun discussion with you the last couple of days. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really nice to be in conversation with other people on this. It so enriches the understanding and other people's experiences. This is really good.
For sure. All right, well, I think we finished with Beatitude 4, where we took the classic, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, they shall be filled," and translated through the Aramaic construct, and that is, "You who hunger for the mind structure underlying the attitude, judgment, and behavior described as just and fair behavior between people, for you shall attain it." So, well, all of a sudden we'll become a field that attracts justice rather than plays out the projections of somebody else deserves whatever it is we give them. So any other thoughts about that Beatitude before we move on to the next one?
No, it's just, I think really what's my experience with Beatitude 4 is as we do that work, I guess I do, I shouldn't say no, yes I do.
Go for it.
as we do that work, we really come more and more in alignment with what our secondary purpose is. Because as the primary purpose is being fulfilled more, then we start to be kind of moved in that direction of our true fulfillment, or what's really in alignment for our secondary purpose.
Yeah, and if you look at the Greek translation of that, of righteousness, which has become an interesting, we hear people talking about their righteous anger and such, and it's nothing to do with this Beatitude from the Aramaic perspective. It's that we bring our mind into alignment with truth, and in so doing, we function from being and follow the guidance, the right action that comes from being rather than men's concepts of justice or what have you.
That's it. And it's not in the transition of moving from really my experience of living out of mostly my carbon-based mind to purification. In that process of purification, the right action can be 180 degrees from what we perceive would have been the right action. And that creates kind of almost a dissonance in the mind a little bit. It's like, okay, well, wait, I'm in this new aligned state and I'm being kind of moved in this direction, and there's sort of an energetic alignment in that direction, but it's different than the way that I might have done it in the past.
Right. And
what would have been obvious in the past.
Right. And the interesting thing that you can put in juxtaposition with that is that the behavior, the thoughts, the words might be exactly the same as they were from the old way of functioning. They're going to have life in them now rather than just be a repeat of something from the past. And the whole idea of the Beatitudes, the whole idea of this work is that we're truly functioning out of being, functioning where love is conscious, active, and present in us. So while the words might be identical from when I was functioning out of carbon-based memory, it's just replicating whatever's there. There's no life there. There's no live experience. It's just replicating the past. And this may be all the same words, all the same actions. Everything looks the same, but there's actual human life in the experience. And that's what this whole body work is about. And you go back to Yeshua, and you'd think by the way many churches present what he taught that he came here to teach us about dogma and doctrine and religiosity and all of that. And if you go back and look at his words, he's like, I have a single purpose, folks. I come to bring you life, and life more abundantly. to put life back into the moment where carbon-based memory is just replicating, and literally, he talks about, let the dead bury the dead, the blind lead the blind, that when we're just functioning out of carbon-based memory, there's no actual life there.
And that ties right into Beatitude 5, where when someone does that and there is life restored in the person, it starts to flow out into the world. And I'll give you an opportunity to kind of kick that off.
Sure. So number 5, next one is classically translated as, "Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy." And that oftentimes harkens back into that, well, I'll be big about it, I'll be merciful, but in Aramaic it says, "You who have rachma." And, I can remember back in the day when we were working on understanding this word rachma, a live work was going on of what does this mean? And we actually I was traveling with the manuscript, getting digital imaging, looking to get high-res digital images done on it. I was out in California, and we connected with a community of Native American speakers. I actually took the manuscript to one of their services, and one of them got up and read it, just like it was, like they were reading something in English. It was pretty cool to be part of that, and we were asking people who were native Aramaic speakers, it's still a very live language, what this word rachma meant. And the response we got was, "We don't know. The meaning has been lost." And the most profound thing that they could say about the word rachma was, "We don't know what it means, but our tradition says it's the most precious jewel you could have." And it related to, related to something like a big diamond ring. It's like really precious stuff. And what we had determined at that point, and it was kind of confirmed by them, but there was no real remembrance of the original meaning of the word, was that rachma was this filter in the frontal lobes of the brain, and medical science is catching up and starting to show, gee, there's a place in the brain where when love is there, it changes behavior, it changes perception, does all kinds of things, just exactly what the Aramaic spoke about. So there's this filter, then when it's connected to active present love, when it's live with love, it shifts everything, and it becomes quite literally a gateway through which our created essence, love, shows up in physiology. And the way that I've developed over the years to bring people to that experience is simply to invite them to think about the first time they held a newborn child. And for people who've had that experience, to just go back and remember holding the newborn and tap into the essence of the newborn. And virtually everybody that we've asked that question of, and we've done it all over the globe, different countries, different cultures, different languages, hold the newborn, and everybody comes back with, first of all, it's usually a smile. Even people who they kind of look like they're living a pretty miserable existence, if they'll just take a moment and tap into the moment where they held that newborn child. And it may be a child that, it was 25 years ago, and they're angry at the child, and the child's misbehaving, and it's done all kinds of things. But when they stop and they tap in, there's a breath and a sweetness that comes into them. And they use words based in love, variations on the theme of love, to describe that newborn. And then I'll ask people, so is the newborn loving you, or is the newborn love? And it just becomes so obvious to everyone. It's like, no, they're not doing love. It's who they are. And when I realized that's who I am, yesterday we talked about, I had just, after the show the other day when you were on with me, I was listening to an historian who came up with a thing called the Mr. Magoo hypothesis. Have you ever heard of that?
I don't think so, unless I heard it from you, but don't remember it.
Okay. Well, actually, I just came in touch with it the other day, so it's not something I've ever talked about before, but
okay.
Do you remember the cartoon character, Mr. Magoo?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you remember anything about the cartoons? What they really were? What happened in them?
I do not.
I remember watching them, but I didn't have any real recollection. It's been a long time. But this historian goes on to explain why he came up with this thesis called the Mr. Magoo hypothesis, and that is that Mr. Magoo was this character who was so nearsighted he had never had any idea where he was, but he had an expectation of where he was and what he was doing and who he was in that space. And he behaved as though his expectations in that space were true about where he was, and it never matched. He was walking through the world. He walks through a lion's den, and he thinks he's at the zoo, and it's just unfolded. I mean, it's such a perfect metaphor for people who've forgotten that they are literally conscious, active, present love. They think they're rage or fear or pain or trauma or drama, and they're walking through the world as though they are this rage or fear, and they're in this space that's designed for active, present love, but their mind's whole construct is that of something that makes their belief about themselves foolish. I went back after listening to him. This was just the other day that I came across this historian's presentation, and watched a couple of the cartoons. It was like, oh, I'd forgotten. I maybe never even realized that that's what it was. It was just kind of this goofy thing. But when you see it, it's worth getting on YouTube and just Googling one or two, or YouTubing one or two Mr. Magoo cartoons, because he's literally thinks he's in one place and he's in another, and it creates such ridiculous circumstances. And this, to me, is how this presence of Rachma is how we undo the Mr. Magoo in ourselves. Because we open the gateway for the truth about who we are to enter into, to flood into physiology and into the experience of the moment. And rather than acting as the ridiculous self that, our early traumatic experiences or our genes told us we were, we start to function as we truly are, and we show up in the world as truth, and then we get to interact honestly in the world. And the result that 2,000 years ago Yeshua offered of this is that when you open this gateway that brings literally active present love into this form, when we look at someone at what we call a human so-called body, there's no reason to believe there's any human life there unless love is present and active in that form. It's just a human-looking form. But opening this literal gateway, it brings, it's a space through which love shows up in our physiology and starts to fuel everything. And two, the mind itself is kept on track through the presence of intentions, which are the raw material of goals. The mind is kept on track with love rather than getting lost in hostility or fear. And so the result that Yeshua promised with this one was, you'll receive it. They'll end up living as the presence of love, and the Mr. Magoo experience will be gone. Now, I don't think that part was actually in the scriptures 2,000 years ago, but it kind of is a great metaphor for us functioning out of something that we're not.
Certainly is, and you have such a good articulation of Rachma, so I'm going to just leave that where it's at, and it's really, really well done. And for what I'll share on Beatitude 5 is I'll just share kind of an example of a lived experience of how this showed up for me. Just, it showed up many, many times, but just how it showed up in this particular one. Because one of the things that begins to happen as we do Beatitudes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and that repeats. And I see this as kind of a roadmap that, okay, well, Beatitude 5 is really saying that if we keep doing this, we're going to get to this restored state, like this restoration with, this Rachma. And one of the things that I envision is that as we fill up, because remember, I was learning these and really practicing them in earnest and continue to, but I saw the contrast so distinctly as I was going through 2011 to 2015 with the whole mental health stuff. And I would say for a while I became really selfish, and I've used the word divinely selfish. I don't know if I heard that from you or Rex, but that's a word that I heard from somebody. And I had always thought, well, that was selfish in a bad way. And in this work, I realized, well, the divine selfishness is actually needed for the restoration of who it is we really are, to shed anything that's out of alignment with that pure state.
The place I've come with that word of selfish is a shift in the language to it's a state of being self-wise as opposed to selfish. Yeah. There's a transition word that, I do it from that state of being, and it's always on track with love, and therefore always self-wise, and will serve all of life at the same time. Because I've got that earlier beatitude where just and fair behavior is the underlying construct in my mind that directs all of my behavior.
Well, and that aligns with this one really well too, because as we fill up, think of a cup that's empty, and if we've blocked out or resisted this pure state, then we're essentially denying the true nature of who we are. And so as that restoration starts to happen, I think of the cup kind of filling up, and then at the top of the cup it overflows. Well, if it overflows, then there's lots that can be given. And so we could just let it overflow and drop to the ground, or we can put it out there in the world. And the story I'm going to share here is from Starbucks. I was actually using Starbucks as my office away from home at the time, and I would go there and write and do whatever work I was doing. And one day I was sitting there, and this thought came up to go get a chocolate chip cookie. And I didn't particularly have an inclination that, it wasn't what would typically be there for me would be craving something, right? It's like that was absent. It was just the thought was go get a chocolate chip cookie. So I go up and
sounds like divine
looking around. Yes, this divine guidance comes. So I'm in line thinking, okay, well, I ordered the chocolate chip cookie, and the barista says, would you like that warmed up? I said, sure. Could you put it on a plate? It was instead of the bag, and they said, sure. So they come back with this chocolate chip cookie that's all warmed up. And as I turn, that same inner voice says, well, actually, my eyes are directed to a woman. I actually paused in the Starbucks, and I look over, and there's a woman there, and the voice says, go give it to that woman. And I'm like, okay, this is really strange, right? This is not in my comfort zone at all. And so I did it. I went over and I said, hey, I bought this chocolate chip cookie, and I'd like to give it to you. And she looked up, and you would have thought she won the lottery or something in terms of her demeanor. She's like, really? She's like, thank you. like I really needed that today. And and actually, she said I really needed that today later, so I messed up the story a little bit. But she was just thank you and appreciated it, and et cetera. So I went back and worked for a couple hours, and she packed up and she was walking out. And I didn't notice, but she caught my attention, and said, hey, I just want you to know that I really needed that today, and I genuinely appreciate what you did. I don't know what that woman was going through, but that was an insight I had of this overflowing from kind of the true heart center, right? That true Rahma love overflowing out into the world. And where the first four Beatitudes to me have, and I know I'm going just from the lived experience of them, to me felt more like, not that they didn't affect other people, but more like it was like me trying to navigate, like, who am I and what is it that is happening here? And so as that restoration started to happen, then it became more clear. It's like, okay, this is to be put out. This is to be shared. This is to allow for that energy, that love to be brought to the world.
Over the years, people
and of course, to finish where it says, blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy, and I know that word's Rahma. It's like I received then this immense love restored in me again. It was almost like a reverberation of, wow, I didn't even do a big thing to me. I just bought a cookie, right? But when she said that it was so meaningful for her, it was almost like it filled me up. So I don't know if the metaphor would continue this way, but it's almost like my cup got bigger, right?
I'm with you. I mean, that's exactly what he says the result will be. If you open this thing called Rahma, and your judgment and behavior are fueled by the presence of love, what it says is you'll receive it. So it sounds like, as you gave it, you received it, and then it came back double. That's precisely the principle he's talking about here. So, right on track.
And I want to encourage people, if they're going to practice these, it's like, again, just like we talked about a couple of days ago, there's a patience, being gentle and patient and starting with where you're at and letting that be okay, but what these promises are, these aren't like, something that you have to rush into. This is something that it's going to happen. If you do these things, promises, you will receive them. You will receive the fruits of these practices.
Well, that's that principle in step 7 in the reality management worksheet is I give something away, I get the original, they get the carbon copy. And even if they're not home for delivery, I've already received it. In this case, that woman was home for delivery, and it obviously filled her to overflowing, and she was able to once again return it to you, and who knows who else. It's that expansion principle. And interesting, in the Aramaic, if we take the phrase that was the kingdom of heaven is within you, the word that is translated as heaven is the kingdom of expansion. It's within you. It's like when you allow this energy to move through you, when you let that gateway open.
Nice.
Everything shifts. And we're fueled, literally fueled by that which this human device is designed to be fueled by. I'll oftentimes ask people the question, have you got a device in your home or your office or your car or your shop that works really well when you unplug it from its power supply? Everybody says, well, of course not. What makes you think that your human form could possibly function properly if you unplug it from love? It's power supply. And there's a gateway, Rahma, that was understood. It's looking more and more, according to research, like it's what's called part of the brain that's called the angular gyrus. And that's where that the whole system is changed by the presence of love in that part of the brain.
I have a question for you, and one of the things I think you said, and I may not have heard you correctly, but you had mentioned this idea of the kingdom of heaven being expansion, right? If I heard you right.
Yes.
And I've also heard you explain the kingdom of heaven as a community of love. And so can you talk to that? Is that the same thing? Just a different way of expressing?
To me, it would be the same thing. It would be
okay.
What I heard you describing in your beautiful chocolate chip analogy or story is exactly that. So you had an inclination that came through Rahma. You fulfilled that inclination and you handed it off, which expanded the presence of love, obviously, for this woman, who in turn, fueled by love, returned the energy to you and expanded it still further. And what came out of that, like, if you guys happen to be back in that store tomorrow and that woman was sitting at that table and you looked at each other, what would you be living in? The community of love. It's expanded and it's eternal. when we choose to go there. And the internal benefit, and this is again where we receive it, is we're plugging our physiology back into the energy source that it was always designed to work from. It was never, and it will never function from rage or guilt or grief or hate or vengeance or sadness or greed. It will never function from any of that. The only result will become, people will walk into more drama and trauma, or literally find themselves in their own hells. It was interesting. There's a Netflix series that Jeannie and I watched not too long ago called Lucifer. And
Sure.
The devil. Have you seen it?
I have. I've seen, I think, maybe three of the seasons.
It's pretty interesting. Well, in one of the later seasons, and for those who are listening who are not familiar with it, and there's some pretty good stuff that happens in it, but, Satan is in hell and decides he wants to go on vacation, so he moves to L.A. And he decides he likes L.A., so he's going to stay there. But there's a point, and it's so right on. In fact, they stopped after 6 seasons, and I've actually got it in my notes. I've made some notes and plan to communicate with the developers of it, because they left it at such a perfect place to bring actual forgiveness to the world. But if you remember, the devil, Satan, Lucifer, has this power, and his power is he gets close to people, captures their gaze, looks into their eyes, and asks them, what do you really want? And the only thing they can do, they literally go into an altered state, and they tell them what their true goal is. And it's right on with forgiveness, so right on. But in one of the last, I don't remember exactly which one, maybe 3 or 4 from the end of season 6, is he expresses how his job as Satan was to find out those deepest desires, their goals, and make sure they weren't fulfilled.
Oh, interesting.
And there's the core of forgiveness. That, whenever, and it's so backwards to virtually everybody when they first, wait a minute, why would I cancel this perfectly good goal for somebody to cherish and honor me? That's stupid. Well, you're right. It's a perfectly good goal, and you would never cancel because there's something wrong with it. But if you load it into your mind and it resonates in you some form of hostility or fear, you're now living in your own hell. What's Satan's job? To make sure you stay living there. And in Aramaic, the word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. And you watch the average person when you ask them to be responsible for their rage, their fear, their guilt, their insanity, whatever it is, what do? Oh, no, that's not true. They go into resistance, and then they tell you their mind's lie, their story about how it's somebody else's fault. The resistor, one who misleads, precisely Satan. So at some point, I'm planning on communicating with the producers of that and inviting them into and handing them off the technology of forgiveness, because they've set the stage literally for Lucifer to deliver actual forgiveness to the world, which I think would be just like the epitome of redundancy.
That'd be a clever twist.
Well, I was so shocked, and it doesn't show up until I think it was maybe halfway or more through the last season of it, that he just kind of slipped. And if he didn't have the brain cells, it would just go by. Most people wouldn't recognize it as meaning anything. But he's like, oh, my job is saying just to know your deepest desire and make sure it never happens. And it's just a perfect setup for season 7 for him to come back and say, okay, now I'm going to do the big reveal. Here it is. And to hand people, the next power, there are other characters in the that are other divine creatures, and they each have a power. Well, I can see where season 7 would be the power that this new iteration of Lucifer has, is the ability to inspire people to cancel the goals, collapse the perception that their pain is based in and clean up carbon-based memory. It would just be like a perfect seventh season to close it out and deliver forgiveness to the world.
Well, I support you in making that connection, because that would be quite wonderful for them to have that information and tie it in.
Yeah, it would be so perfect. So hold space for that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Then let's look at the next beatitude, which is historically interpreted as, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall
see God.
See God. And in Aramaic, it speaks of you who have, and the word in Aramaic is dadsian, you who have a completely purified mind. In other words, you got to go in and clean up carbon-based memory. The other day we talked about perception is a construct of the mind, and if everything comes from carbon-based memory, these constructs, then we have, and there are unresolved issues, then whatever perceptions our mind generates, those perceptions are going to be totally and completely false about the actuality of the world. They'll only be true about us. As we do our work, you clean out carbon-based memory so that everything based in the lie, anything based in hostility or fear, is removed from the structure. And then we've got a database, this multi-generational database called carbon-based memory, that has only accurate information in it. And when it has accurate information in it, then everything it presents about the actuality is accurate. There are no lies left in it. But it's still not the truth, even though everything it holds is true, because it's not a live present moment experience as we're designed to have. It's still replicating something from the past. So we go from errant perception, but that's still death. But when we've cleaned up the database, then that becomes the stepping stone for, well, we've acquired the habit of collapsing carbon-based memories constructs. So now what do we have? We have a clean and open space within the mind. That 9-bit space is open, and now the creator's mind can write enlightened perception. We can gather directly from the actuality a live present moment experience that is truly filled with the active presence of love and the true experience that we're designed for with life. So we go from errant perception to corrected perception to enlightened perception. And so this beatitude says exactly that. You who have a purified, completely purified mind, and what it says is that at that moment, you're now going to comprehend or come into direct relationship with Allah, the Creator, the invisible source of creation. It's like they talk in the scriptures about the mind of man is not yet conceived of what lies in store. The mind of man can't do that. But when we clean carbon-based memory up, Adamos, the red clay, then we can become an instrument that enters into full relationship with love. And it's just so profoundly powerful, considering, as the alternative of fulfilling all the goals of the non-being mind.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well said, well said. And I know we don't have too many more minutes here. And so I don't want to repeat everything you said because it was so well said. Another way that I really like the way that J.M. also said it, with his interpretation, he says, where it says, blessed are the pure of heart, he wrote, wise are they who are consistently restored in this way, which is reflective of that pure heart. And rather than for they shall see God, like flashes of lightning, God will increasingly reveal itself in the depth of their soul. And that reflects what you were saying, I believe, in terms of that corrected perception of things and that enlightened perception, or like getting to that place where there's this. And my word for it which was a difficult word, honestly, for me to kind of come into contact with, because most of my life I felt like I didn't know anything, that I was a little bit lost. I mentioned last time the idea of the duck with the, feet paddling underwater, and a lot of insecurity. And as my work with this started to come into a place where that purity of heart really took more hold, there was a knowing that was from that connected place, from that source, holy, pure space. And I'll share one of the examples of how that started to show up for me. Because I had a lot of issues with money, I'm going to use a money example. I had a lot of fear of money. I put a lot of energy into money, and in my early days, put money above a lot of things. So it was interesting because in some of my work with this, as my heart began to purify, there would be this clarity of what was going to happen with whether it's the stock market or something. And I remember several times where I was given insights of, hey, there's an insight of what's going to take place. But I didn't believe it. I was still in this, well, I am unable to know, right? So I would doubt it, and then it would happen. I'm like, well, that's interesting. And there was this, for me, kind of a restoration over time into trusting more and more and more and more and more and more and more. And the more I trusted, the more I was able to act in a way that was consistently in alignment. Now, I'm not perfect, of course, in terms of doing that, but there's an element of contrast of how I had been to how I am today. And there is a clear knowing, and I know you know this because you will, call people out of the blue sometimes, right, to them, and you just call. And I remember when you used to do that with me, it's like, wow, how did he know? Not that you necessarily had the full information of why that call was important before you called, but you trusted the divine spark that in the pure space, you trusted that and acted. So that
back
trust
to the first Beatitude.
Yes.
And exactly what you just said is back to the first Beatitude. Are you living in the eternal forces that will incline you toward behavior and follow through with that behavior?
Yes, and this
right
becomes more, Beatitude 6 becomes more, it's like, hey, that deepens. That becomes, there's this wisdom that starts to come forth that is more and more in someone's life as they continue to practice these things, comes into their life more and more with a trust that is way beyond, for me, a trust that I had ever experienced in my life with anything. I had misplaced trust. I had different ideas of what trust was, but this became a pure trust in this divine source.
Trust, Ruka. Back to that eternal force that was designed for us to incline us toward the highest behaviors possible. And we are down to the last few seconds, so thank you for that. We have one more to cover if you've got the space tomorrow. Mark, well, no, I guess today's Friday, isn't it? So it'll be Monday. If you happen to have the space, we can. Oh, I was thinking it's Friday. Thursday. Oh, good. We've got another day. All right. Well, does that work for you tomorrow?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, let's do it
Great.
tomorrow.
All right. Everybody, have the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift.